A 28-year-old man married a wealthy 70-year-old woman, only to nearly lose his mind 5 days later when he discovered her massive secret. A story no one knows. The day I married Eleanor Sterling felt like stepping into a movie. Not my movie, someone else's. I was 28, a librarian from a small town in Indiana who made a modest living surrounded by the quiet company of books. She was 70, a Chicago socialite of a bygone era, with a sprawling estate in Lake Forest, and a fortune that was spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. Our wedding was a quiet affair at a Cook County courthouse, just the two of us and 2 witnesses provided by her lawyer. Afterwards, a black town car, so silent it felt like it was gliding on air, took us back to her home, my new home. The mansion was less a house and more a private museum. Marble floors gleamed under chandeliers that looked like frozen fireworks. The air smelled of lemon polish and old money. I remember standing in the grand entryway, clutching my single duffel bag, feeling like a misplaced character in a historical novel. My entire apartment in Fort Wayne could have fit into her foyer. Eleanor, sensing my awe, just smiled. It was a practiced, gentle smile that didn't quite reach her sharp, intelligent blue eyes. "Welcome home, Leo," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "People, I know what you're thinking." I'd heard the whispers from the few friends I'd told. "Gold digger, what are you thinking? Is this some kind of joke?" But it wasn't. I met Eleanor when she made a significant donation to our library system. I was assigned to give her a tour. We started talking, first about books, then about art, history, life. She had a mind that crackled with energy, a wit that could cut you down or lift you up. I was drawn to her stories, to the world she represented. She said she was drawn to my quiet nature, my unspoiled view of the world. It felt real. She said my youth made her feel alive again, and her experience made me feel grounded. I believed her. I think I loved the idea of her, and she loved the idea of me. The first few days were idyllic in a strange, sterile way. We had breakfast on a sun-drenched patio overlooking a garden so perfectly manicured it looked fake. We'd take slow walks, and she'd name every flower, telling me the year her late husband, a man named Arthur, had planted it. She spoke of him fondly as a brilliant but distant man who had been gone for over a decade. Her life seemed orderly, managed, and profoundly lonely. I thought my presence was filling a void. The house was enormous, with dozens of rooms, but she explained that she kept to the east wing. "The west wing is dreadfully old, my dear," she'd said, waving a dismissive hand. "All dust and memories. We're having it prepped for a long renovation. There's no reason to go over there." The doors leading to it were always closed. It seemed reasonable. A woman of her age wouldn't want to maintain a space the size of a hotel. I was content to explore the library, a 2-story masterpiece, with a rolling ladder that was a fantasy come true for a man like me. I was finding my place, or so I thought. I tried to make myself useful, to feel less like a kept man and more like a partner. I offered to help the chef, a stern woman named Mrs. Gable, but was politely shooed away. I tried to organize a section of the library, but found it was already in perfect alphabetical order. I was a husband, but I had no role. I was an ornament, another beautiful, well-cared-for thing in Eleanor's collection. And that feeling, that tiny seed of doubt, is where it all began to unravel. The slow creep of wrongness started on the 3rd night. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a sound. It was faint, a rhythmic creaking coming from the floor above, but in the direction of the forbidden west wing. I sat up in the king-sized bed, the silk sheets feeling cold against my skin. The house was tomb-silent otherwise. I listened. Creak, pause, creak. Like a rocking chair. Eleanor was sound asleep beside me, a delicate, almost inaudible snore escaping her lips. I told myself it was just the house. Old mansions make noises. They settle. They breathe. I lay back down, but sleep wouldn't come. The next day I felt a new kind of awareness, a low-grade hum of anxiety. I watched everything. I noticed things I hadn't before. At lunch, Mrs. Gable brought out a tray for Eleanor and me. A few minutes later, I saw her emerge from the kitchen with a second, smaller tray. It held a bowl of soup, some bread, and a glass of milk. She walked briskly towards the back of the house, in the general direction of the staff stairs that led up towards the west wing. "Is one of the staff members feeling unwell?" I asked Eleanor, trying to sound casual. She looked up from her salad, her fork paused mid-air. "Yes, that's right. Just a seasonal cold. Mrs. Gable is a dear, always looking after everyone." Her answer was quick, smooth, plausible. But there was a flicker in her eyes, a momentary shuddering before the calm returned. It was so fast I almost missed it. That afternoon, I was in the library, trying to lose myself in a first edition of Moby Dick. As I pulled the heavy volume from the shelf, another book, smaller and thinner, slipped out from behind it and fell to the floor. It was a children's picture book, its cover faded, The Little Engine That Could. I smiled, a wave of nostalgia washing over me. I opened it. On the inside cover, written in a child's looping cursive, it said, "For Ellie and Maggie. May you always climb your mountains together. Love, Mom." Ellie. I knew that was Eleanor's childhood nickname, but who was Maggie? I took the book to her. She was in the conservatory, sketching the orchids. "Look what I found," I said, holding it out. She glanced at it, and her entire posture changed. Her shoulders tensed. The warmth drained from her face, leaving behind a mask of polite indifference. "Oh, that. Who's Maggie?" I asked, my voice gentle. "A childhood friend," she said, not looking at me, her focus entirely on her drawing. "She passed away a very long time ago. A tragic thing." The finality in her tone was a slammed door. Don't ask more. But the inscription said Ellie and Maggie. It implied a close relationship, maybe sisters. She had told me she was an only child. I put the book back on a table, the cheerful cover now feeling sinister. My mind was racing. The noise in the night, the extra food tray, the hidden book. I felt like I was building a case in my head, but the evidence was flimsy, circumstantial. I started to feel paranoid, like a fool who couldn't accept his good fortune. Was I trying to create drama where there was none? Was this my own insecurity talking? I spent the fourth day trying to be normal. I feigned interest in her stories about the Chicago art scene in the 70s. I complimented her on her dress. I was playing the part of the devoted young husband. But inside, I was a coiled spring. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not by a person, but by the house itself. The silence in the long hallways seemed to hold secrets. The portraits of her ancestors on the walls seemed to follow me with their painted eyes. That evening, a delivery car from a local pharmacy came to the front gate. I happened to be near the entryway when the housekeeper signed for the small paper bag. I glanced at the receipt stapled to the outside. The name on the prescription wasn't Eleanor Sterling. It was Margaret Sterling. My heart hammered against my ribs. Sterling. The same last name. I waited until the housekeeper was gone, and I walked into the sitting room where Eleanor was reading. I tried to control my voice, to keep it even. "Eleanor, a prescription was just delivered. The name on it was Margaret Sterling." She looked up, her expression unreadable. She placed a bookmark in her novel and closed it. She looked at me, a long, calculating look. I expected a denial, anger, confusion. Instead, she gave a small, weary sigh. "Leo, you worry too much," she said softly. "Margaret is my middle name. I was named after my grandmother. Sometimes, for privacy reasons with certain medical matters, I use it. It prevents unwanted attention. You can't imagine how people pry." It was brilliant. It was the perfect explanation. It was logical, sophisticated, and it made me feel like an idiot. A snooping, suspicious fool. She was looking at me with an expression of mild disappointment, the kind a teacher gives a student who should know better. I apologized. I told her I was just being overprotective. She waved it off, but something had shifted between us. The air was thick with my unspoken questions and her unyielding control. That night, I lay awake for hours, feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. Was I the problem? Was I inventing a conspiracy? I had a beautiful life handed to me on a silver platter, and I was trying to tarnish it with suspicion. I was the ungrateful interloper, the young fool who couldn't handle the complexities of an older, wealthier world. The creaking from the West Wing started again. Only this time, it wasn't just creaking. Underneath it, I could hear another sound, barely audible. Someone was crying, a soft, hopeless sound that chilled me to my core. That was the moment I knew I wasn't crazy. It was day 5. The sound of weeping, faint as it was, cut through all my self-doubt. It was real. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could. Eleanor didn't stir. I crept out of our suite and stood in the grand, dark hallway. The crying was more distinct here, a thin thread of sorrow coming from the sealed-off West Wing. I had to know. I walked to the heavy oak door that separated the two halves of the house and tried the handle. Locked. Of course. My mind raced. A key. There had to be a key. Then I remembered, 2 days ago in the library, I had been looking for a paperweight in the drawer of her late husband's massive mahogany desk. Tucked away in the back, I'd seen a heavy brass ring holding a dozen old ornate skeleton keys. At the time, I'd thought they were just another antique. Now they were my only hope. My heart pounded as I slipped back into the library. The room was bathed in moonlight, pouring through the tall windows. I pulled open the drawer. The keys were there. They felt heavy and cold in my trembling hand. Back at the West Wing door, I started trying them, one by one. The silence of the house was absolute, broken only by the scrape of brass against brass and the frantic thumping of my own pulse. The first key didn't fit. The second got stuck. The third, fourth, fifth, nothing. My frustration grew. Then, on the 8th try, a key slid in smoothly. I turned it. A loud, definitive clunk echoed in the hallway. The lock had opened. I pushed the door. It swung inward on silent, well-oiled hinges, revealing a corridor choked with darkness. A wave of dusty, stale air washed over me. I took my phone out of my pocket and turned on the flashlight, the small beam cutting a nervous path through the gloom. This wing wasn't being prepped for renovation. It was perfectly preserved, but covered in a thin layer of dust. The furniture was draped in white sheets, like ghosts in an abandoned ballroom. The weeping was closer now. I followed the sound down the hall, my footsteps muffled by the thick runner on the floor. I passed a sitting room, a dining room. It was a self-contained apartment. The sound led me to a closed door at the very end of the hall. I put my ear to the wood. The crying was right on the other side, a woman's quiet, heartbreaking sobs. I took a deep breath, my hand on the doorknob. This was it. I was about to cross a line from which there was no return. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was a bedroom, furnished simply. A bed, a dresser, a small bookshelf. And sitting in a wicker rocking chair by the window, silhouetted against the moonlit garden, was a woman. She was wrapped in a simple shawl, her hair the same silver white as Eleanor's. As she turned her head toward the light from my phone, my blood ran cold. It was Eleanor's face. Exactly. The same high cheekbones, the same shape of the eyes, the same elegant nose. But this face was different. It was etched with a profound, deep-seated sadness. It was thinner, paler, and the eyes that met mine were not sharp and calculating, but wide with fear and a startling gentleness. Before I could speak, a voice behind me, sharp and icy, broke the spell. "Leo!" I spun around. Eleanor was standing at the entrance to the corridor, her silk robe pulled tight around her, her face a thunderous mask of fury. "What are you doing in here?" she demanded. I couldn't speak. I just pointed my shaking hand toward the woman in the chair. Eleanor's eyes flickered to the woman, and her expression softened, but not with kindness. It was the look of a zookeeper whose prize animal had just been discovered. She stepped into the room, her authority filling the space. "This is my sister, Margaret," she said, her voice dropping to a low, controlled tone. "My twin sister." My mind short-circuited. Twin sister. She had lied. She had lied about everything. She's She's been unwell for a very, very long time. Eleanor continued, walking over to Margaret and placing a proprietary hand on her shoulder. Margaret flinched. She's delicate. The world is too much for her. I've been caring for her here, where she can be safe, where no one can hurt her. The words were meant to sound benevolent, caring, but standing there in that dusty, hidden room, they sounded like a jailer's justification. I looked from Eleanor's hard, resolute face to Margaret's frightened one. Margaret wasn't looking at Eleanor. She was looking at me, her eyes pleading. Later that day, after a tense, silent breakfast, Eleanor went into the city for a board meeting. It was my chance. I found my way back to the West Wing. The door was unlocked. I found Margaret in the same chair, staring out at the garden. I introduced myself properly. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft, rusty from disuse. She wasn't incoherent or unwell. She was just defeated, lonely. She told me she hadn't left the property in over 20 years. Eleanor had convinced her long ago that she was too fragile, too prone to anxiety to handle the outside world. Eleanor brought her books, managed her food, her medicine, her entire existence. "I've always wanted to see the ocean," Margaret whispered, her eyes distant. "The coast of Oregon. I've seen pictures." She said it was a silly dream. A silly dream. Eleanor had everything, and she denied her sister, her twin, even the hope of a dream. That's when the next piece fell into place. I went back to the library, to Arthur Sterling's desk. This time, I wasn't looking for keys, I was looking for answers. In a locked bottom drawer, I had to force it open with a letter opener. I found a folder of old legal documents, and in it was Arthur's will, a document that detailed his vast estate. But tucked behind it was another, older document, their father's will. I read it, my hands shaking. The family fortune was to be left to his daughters, Eleanor and Margaret, to be split equally. But there was one devastating clause. If upon his death, one daughter was deemed medically unfit or incapable of managing her own affairs by a certified physician, the other would gain full trusteeship over the entire inheritance until the first was deemed fit again. A declaration of fitness that I realized would never come as long as Eleanor was the gatekeeper. It wasn't an act of protection. It was a cold, calculated coup. I waited for Eleanor to return. When her car pulled up the long, winding driveway, I was standing in the foyer with the will in my hand. She walked in, handing her coat to the housekeeper, a victorious smile on her face from whatever business she had concluded in the city. Then she saw my expression and the document in my hand. Her smile vanished. "What is that?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. "I know what you did," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I didn't know I possessed. "This isn't about caring for her. This was never about protecting her. You used her grief after your parents died to have her declared incompetent. You stole her life, her future, her inheritance." The mask of the elegant, composed matriarch shattered. Her face twisted into a snarl. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she hissed. "You, a boy from a library, dare to judge me? I gave her a safe life. The world would have chewed her up and spit her out. I gave her peace. You gave her a cage," I shot back. "A beautiful, furnished cage. You didn't give her peace. You gave her solitary confinement." I walked past her, up the grand staircase to our room. I threw my few belongings back into the same duffel bag I'd arrived with just 5 days earlier. It felt like a lifetime ago. When I came back down, she was still standing there, rigid with fury. "If you walk out that door, you get nothing," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You'll go back to your pathetic little life with nothing to show for it." I looked at her, at this woman I had married, and saw a stranger, a monster hiding in plain sight. "I'm already leaving with more than I came with," I said. "I'm leaving with myself." I walked out the heavy front door and didn't look back. The air outside the estate gates smelled different, like car exhaust, damp pavement, and freedom. The next morning, I used the last $100 I had to my name to take a bus back to a friend's couch in Chicago. The first call I made wasn't to my family. It wasn't to a job. It was to a lawyer, a pro bono firm that specialized in estate litigation and elder abuse. I told them everything. I told them about Margaret, about the will, about the West Wing. It was a long shot, I knew, but as I explained Margaret's quiet wish to see the Oregon coast, I knew I couldn't just walk away. I hadn't married Eleanor for her money, and I wasn't going to let her money be the prison that held her sister captive forever. I didn't get the fortune or the life of luxury, but as I sat on that lumpy couch in my friend's tiny apartment, I felt richer than I ever had in that soulless mansion. I had lost a fantasy, but I had found a purpose.